The world is changing fast. New technologies, shifting social landscapes, and evolving ways of living can feel both exciting and overwhelming. So, how do we find balance? I'm Stephanie von Bismarck, activist, author, and digital educator. Welcome to my podcast, How Do We Manage? So in this episode, we're talking about something that's really heavy. But honestly, it's just too important to ignore. Online pornography. It's everywhere, more than we probably realize. And when you start looking at the number, it's just kind of shocking. Around 13% of the global population struggles with porn addiction. Nearly 30% of all internet traffic is related to porn. And the industry itself, it's worth something like $97 billion. Just to put it into perspective, Pornhub is the fourth most visited site in the US, right after Google, Facebook, and YouTube. But what worries me most is the effect it's having on kids and young adults today. There was this report from the Children's Commission in England last year, and it found that on average, kids are first exposed to porn at the age of 13. And what's even more shocking, 10% of 9-year-olds have already seen graphic content online. By the time they're 11, that jumps to 27%. It's heartbreaking, and it's having real consequences on self-esteem, on how young people view sex and relationships, and the way they understand consent and boundaries. So the big question is, how do we protect our kids from all this stuff? And if they are seeing it, how do we talk about it and support them in the right way? My guest today is someone who can really help us start to answer these questions. Tatiana Kotlyarenko is not only an incredible person, she's an international expert on human trafficking and violence against women and girls, and she's been working in this space for many years. She has a deep understanding of what's going on behind the scenes and how all of this connects to bigger issues like exploitation and abuse. And a note before we start, this episode touches on some heavy and potentially upsetting topics like human trafficking, sexual violence, and explicit content. So if you're not alone or you're around kids, maybe it's better to pop your headphones on. All right, let's get into it. Tatiana, thank you so much for joining me here today for our podcast. You're one of the big experts when it comes to human trafficking and gender-based violence and also online safety. And obviously, online safety is a big concern for us all right now, especially if we have children. But before we go into that topic, tell me a little bit about your upbringing.
Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you so much for raising all the important topics of today in your podcast. My family came as refugees to the States in the 80s from the former Soviet Union, and I grew up in New York City, where a lot of these issues were present, albeit not online. And I thought it was important to commit my life to addressing these issues because they are the cross-section of a variety of human rights violations and dangers to our society.
So that has clearly also sort of inspired your career later on?
It very much did because I saw it all around me. I saw young girls being targeted by what now is called the lover boy technique, where they were just groomed by young men or men and then pushed out into the sex industry. I've seen sexual violence permeating our society as well at a certain level, and I've seen friends and schoolmates and such who have experienced it. And I wanted to make it better, and not just in the States where there are resources, but I wanted to make it better around the globe. So through that, I ended up working in West Africa for quite a few years, had done a little bit of work in Southeast Asia. And then I was seconded by US to work as the advisor on anti-trafficking issues for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is the largest regional security organization, as the advisor on anti-trafficking issues.
And in that line of work, when you sort of look back at your career, when did you realize that what role the internet is going to play in terms to what you're working in?
Rather early on, you could see this happening almost immediately, actually. Because if you look at even the trajectory of internet and what it was used for, a lot of it was used for pornography. If you look at even now, the major websites or the major platforms we use, Netflix, Amazon, X, and such, the internet or the pornography downloads actually are more than all of the visits to those sites combined. So we see it now, and before it was even more so.
For many of us, human trafficking seems like something in everyday life. It's a pretty remote topic. Or do you think that's wrong? How is this affecting like us in a normal life out there?
So yes, my experiences in combating anti-trafficking or creating effective solutions to combat and address and prevent human trafficking. And the reality is, a lot of us have this picture of a girl tied to or handcuffed to a radiator, in some room somewhere, generally from Eastern Europe. So we have our stereotypes of what human trafficking looks like. The reality is, and as well as with the use of internet, this has evolved into something else. Criminals, those that are seeking to exploit people, can use internet effectively. They can actually traffic a child or a woman from a location where she may be over the internet, for example, for webcamming.
Hmm.
So someone across the world can order the abuse of woman, child, man, whoever, whatever their preference is. And this is also within the human trafficking framework.
And if I'm now sitting in my home and I have children in my home and I'm worried about online safety in general, are there any trafficking aspects that could come into play in that area?
It is very dangerous because now that a child, almost each child has an Android phone. At home, traffickers can enter your household. So it's no longer stranger danger. Stay away from, those weird looking men on the street. Traffickers can interact with your child on gaming platforms, on social media platforms, and such, dating sites as well for young teenagers, and have complete access to them with full knowledge of what they like, what they don't like, what their issues are, the school they go to, and such, and groom them through that. Generally, there is an algorithm of how this happens.
Hmm.
When it comes to smaller kids, they pretend to be other small kids.
Hmm.
Where if it's a young girl, they could pretend to be a boy, and they could be of either sex. With boys, they could pretend to be girls,
Hmm. Hmm.
etc. So there's a technique for each age group that has been developed rather successfully, so that they could gain control of the child.
Wow, that seems very frightening for everyone who listens to this.
It is because we are not thinking of this
Yeah.
in reality. But if you, as a parent or as an adult, will go online as a teenager or a 10-year-old, your experience is going to be just so much significantly different. And you will see the amount of people who may seek to exploit you
Hmm.
or groom you in some way.
And how do you think is the best or a few of the best ways to protect our children online?
Frankly, the Australia example comes to mind where children are banned from social media till the age of 16. The
Yeah.
other part is not allowing phones in the bedroom. Having very limited controlled usage of phones, apps, and such, and having these conversations with your children. Because oftentimes, and what I have seen, is that when a child is even exploited online by someone for their images, for example, the parents will say, "You're bad. How could you do this?"
Hmm.
Without the real understanding that the child has just been abused. Someone has come into this child's life, turned them around in a way, and manipulated them using psychological techniques to get their images. The child may not even understand what has happened to them. And they should have the ability to come to you as an adult, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a parent, an aunt, family friend, whatever it is, and say, hey, this has happened to me, help me, without the fear of being punished. Because that's the fear of being punished is what those that are exploiting this child are really using to control them.
Yeah, that's what I also, often experience is when you also have parents that don't allow anything at all. What happens mostly with teenagers anyway, they go to the friend's house, they use devices where they get access to devices, right? But then imagine if something happens, that's what I also had conversation with parents, is like, you want to be the first one they go to and tend to for help. But if you've been the one that didn't allow anything and you've been very, very strict about it, they won't tend to you for help. Whereas that should be the first thing they should do, no?
But it's also about the relationship you build with these children, where you could say, for example, my kids, what I say, I will be the first one to help you. I will say nothing, come to me. With whatever issue you may experience, we will deal with the consequences later, but I will help you without, raising my voice, without being upset, because your safety and well-being comes first before anything else.
Yeah.
Before any consequences to breaking the rules, so to say, that have been created for this child. And that is the very important conduit to creating that relationship so that the child knows they could come to you.
Yeah, and most likely it will happen because, teenagers especially are set out to break rules and to test boundaries. So things will go wrong, right?
They will. And then there's the issue of peer pressure.
Yeah.
Where even if a child does not want to, peer pressure will result in this child being exposed to a variety of different things, for example, like pornography, that the child may not even want to see.
The consumption of pornography is just skyrocketing. I read that by 2025, the revenue is bigger than the music and the conventional film industry combined. But also, our kids are exposed to pornography in an extreme way today than it was in the earlier days. Do you want to explain a little bit the difference to today versus 25 years ago?
25 years ago, there were these VHS tapes and magazines. Generally, they were, what is called not hardcore. These were just images of naked women, for example, and such. These are some of the things you and I were probably exposed in our teenage years. Everyone is to some degree. But things have changed. In a very serious way. So I'll give you an example of a recent report, 2023 report by the UK Children's Commissioner. The average age of watching pornography for the first time in UK is 13 years old. But now the figures get worse because it's also 27% of 11-year-olds that have watched pornography and 10% of 9-year-olds. So one in 10 9-year-olds in UK have watched pornography. But it's not, once again, the pornography that we think that we watched on VHS tapes or the Playboys that the boys snuck around.
Yeah.
They're bad enough. But what they're watching is violence and torture. So 88% of all pornography is violent. So what they're, and most children, according to this particular study, do not want to see this. But what it does is that it has an impact on them both socially, psychologically, cognitively, and physically, long term. And this is something that is also intertwined with this experience. They're also being taught that violence against women and girls is okay. It also forms their sexuality. It also tells them that there's no such thing as rape myth because most of the sexual acts that they're seeing in this hardcore pornography is severe violence. It also tells girls that sexual violence is also okay and they should accept it. So there are so many different pieces to this that are important to really think about.
And what does it do exactly, for example, with boys, if they are exposed too early to that kind of pornography?
One is even their perception of women and girls. Two, their ability to have intimacy.
Okay, let's talk about the perception of girls. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, if they're seeing constant and oftentimes daily violence, sexual violence against women and girls, it's being normalized.
Yeah.
This is the whole thing. They think that this is okay and this is what being, quote unquote, a man is about. So if you want to be a man, you need to behave this way. So it forms their behavior patterns and their interactions with women and girls.
That must also cause anxiety and a lot of pressure, because what you see and what they then often meet in reality is completely different.
That is true. And studies have actually also demonstrated that it does cause loneliness, anxiety, depression, pornography addiction, and a variety of other mental health issues. Because once again, what we call quote unquote pornography is actually scenes of violent torture that a child is watching. As an adult, you can actually somehow understand that this is what you're watching. As a child, you completely do not understand that this is it, and you think this is normal. And your brain has a particular reaction to this.
But also, pornography has a high addictive component, and I'd like to explore that a little more, why that is, and especially why it is so much so as all of the content is getting so much more brutal.
Well, pornography addiction is a little bit like drug addiction. So it's about that next high. Because as a certain level of violence is being normalized in the brain, the pornography industry wants you to be hooked. So they want that next high, that next reaction. So for that addiction to continue and for you to stay on this, because they're making a lot of money, as you have said. So it gets more violent and more violent and more violent. And children are stuck watching this too.
Yeah.
This is the whole thing without really comprehending the real impact on them. And once again, what they're watching, because it's taking them there stage by stage by stage. With drug addiction, a lot of times it starts, well, I'm just trying this out. This is a little bit of fun. Then your body gets accustomed to whatever dose of drug that you're taking. And the same thing happens with pornography. And this is why the pornography industry has also evolved from the, soft-core pictures of women to extremely violent scenes of degradation, abuse, torture, gang rape, etc. That is actually very mainstream at this point.
And that must be very disturbing for any normal sexual relationship.
Well, what we think is normal is not even understood by young people anymore because they have been socialized and trained on what sexuality, intimacy, or sexual interactions look like. And they're generally violence. This is the whole thing. I remember there was a study done in Sweden by a Swedish organization. And one of the big questions that are being asked by young women is choking during sex. Okay. These are some of the things that we're dealing with. You have also, I believe, an article some years back by Teen Vogue on how teenage girls should do anal.
Wow.
So this is the whole thing. Whatever is happening, the trends and patterns in pornography are being played out on teenagers and what the teenagers think that they should be doing or what they should want, or it builds their desires and understanding of their sexuality through the lens of this violence.
So we were talking about the boys, but obviously we want to cover the girls as well. It's a very, very tough situation for girls as well, right?
It is a horribly tough situation as well because girls are watching this. And as I've mentioned, then they're more accepting of sexual violence or violence in general because it is being normalized.
Yeah.
They're seeing this and they're seeing people in these videos pretend to enjoy this. And the other part too, a lot of pornography is produced through trafficking of women, sometimes men. A lot of it is not just willing actors enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
in reality. So we also need to understand that they're actually watching real violence taking place, and they're being told that if you want boys to like you, you need to accept this. This is what, just as boys are being told this is what it looks like, girls are being told that this is what it looks like. And it results also in low self-esteem. It results also in a variety of different issues. And it also creates an extreme vulnerability in young women to sexual exploitation going forward. We have all seen the issue with Andrew Tate and such, and the various vulnerabilities and how easy it is to find a vulnerable young woman who's watched these things, target her, and exploit her, because a lot of this pornography is grooming young girls specifically to be potential victims.
So if I'm a parent now at home and, I'm raising a teenager, I was like, obviously, the development of your own sexuality is what every teenager goes through. And it's a very sort of vulnerable time. And pornography, to some extent, always was some sort of way of, getting to know more about it. So how do we navigate this? And how do we navigate this as a parent?
It comes down to honestly having basic conversations with your children on pornography, what it does, creating safeguards, for example, on the usage of phones, access to pornography on those phones, because children should not be learning about sexuality through violence.
Yes.
They should not be fed all of this with, as I said, severe consequences to their overall development. One. Number two, schools are a good place. To have this. There have been a lot of great projects to address issues like sexting, for example.
Yeah.
And exploitation of girls in this way. And then it goes to a policy level. So a country like Australia, help parents out, because oftentimes parents may not be as literate when it comes to technology as their children, or have the capacity to sit and explain, control, and such what their child does and does not do when it comes to the internet.
Yeah.
So outside of those that can, there needs to be both a legal and policy solution to all of this. And this is something we could also do, lobby our governments and say, hey, we would like to protect our children. We do not want this kind of material raising our children to be damaged, frankly speaking, with long-term public health consequences, for example. We do not want criminals and pedophiles having access to our households. These are the very, very basics, and this could be done. As I said, one, knowledge within the household. So you really start within your household, your community, faith-based, center, whether a church, mosque, or whatever, synagogue, or wherever it may be. You work through that. You work through schools and onwards.
What you're suggesting is really also sitting down with your child and having these very open conversations about what modern day pornography is about, and that it is not normal, that they understand what's out there doesn't reflect reality.
That is very true. But the other part that I did not actually mention is also holding tech accountable for what our children are seeing, for what they are experiencing. A lot of tech targets our children.
Yeah.
Their scrolls are making the money. Children also buy things online, for example. They do.
Yeah.
Or we buy the things that they want for them online, but they're also consumers. And if there are real consequences for tech allowing our children or exposing our children to these types of materials, it will stop as well.
Yeah.
And if there are protections, for example, on social platforms for children.
By the age of 18, 90% of the boys and 60% of the girls will have had some encounter with pornography. So how do we navigate that this is still happening, that they develop in a healthy way, and still really protect them from the harm. So it's the open communication, and it's really the check your devices, right?
Yeah,
What
check
else?
your devices because they're cookies. I mean, you as a parent can actually see which websites your child has visited.
Yeah.
You could put various child protection tools on the phone, for example, or on the computer as well. So there are tech solutions to this, but conversations are very important, and also conversations with the parents of your children's friends. Because if you work in that communal way, your child will be less exposed as well when your child is not at home, for example, and visiting a friend. It's about having conversations as much as possible. But as I said, that's not the only solution. We cannot put a fight against billions of profit every year to the parents' door and say, hey, protect your child now. You know, the danger's coming this way, that way, that way. They're making massive money on this.
Is that the reason, do you think, why we're talking far too little about this and the big dangers? It's all the money that's in there?
Yes, and we do not understand this. It's massive business, massive, massive business. Otherwise, tech can create solutions. If they're pushed to create solutions, they will create them. This is the whole thing. And the other part is that these children are becoming lifetime consumers of the sex industry. It's about creating ongoing demand for this because it is business.
Can you actually say that there's a healthy way to consume pornography for young adults in any way?
I mean, it's the same thing as saying, is there a healthy way to consume heroin, for example, or cigarettes? I would say not. Pornography generally commodifies, women and girls. It normalizes abuse and violence. So I would say, no, there is not a healthy way to consume pornography whatsoever. There are healthy ways of having conversations with your children about their sexuality. There are tools to do so. For example, Culture Reframed has some tools actually discussing these particular issues, as well as many other organizations actually in different countries, where you can engage your child depending on their development and age.
Yeah, that is important because a lot of parents are very uncomfortable to bring up these topics, and it's very, very hard. Or sometimes even starts with sexual education as such, yet alone the talk about pornography. So you say that there is literature and help out there if you go online to start a conversation with your child around that?
There are, and there are many highly developed processes by PhDs, professors, researchers, educationists on how to do so. Because if pornographers are attacking our children in our home, we need to have a line of defense. A line of defense is not silence. A line of defense is actually engaging with our children, providing them with the information that they need in a healthy, positive way. Because they will get it anyhow.
Yeah. Tell me, Tatiana, I had this conversation the other day with a friend of mine who was actually very unhappy. And she was telling me that, her and her husband are not being sexually active anymore, mainly because her husband is hooked onto these sites with all the adult content on it. So it really also affects adult relationships, right?
And just as children can get addicted to these types of images, or videos, so can adults. And many of the adults now, too, have been addicted when they were children. So it creates a very poor trajectory in terms of the ability to maintain positive and healthy sexual relationships, intimacy and such, and results actually in really negative impacts on relationships in general. And interestingly enough, I've heard of the same, but even in the older age group, our parents' age group, where women all of a sudden are faced with either men who are just addicted to pornography and are watching it around the clock, or now being forced to perform specific sexual acts that the men have watched in pornography as well. And once again, as I've mentioned before, a lot of the pornography is extremely violent.
Why is there so little communication about this? Why is it so stigmatized, shameful somehow? Although the world is watching that kind of content, adult content, like There Was No Tomorrow, the revenues are skyrocketing, and yet we hear so little about the big dangers that are out there.
Well, it was the same thing as, previously cigarettes, for example. They were advertised everywhere. It was considered a great and positive thing to do.
Mm.
And then eventually the world came to a massive public health crisis, cancer, etc., and said, okay, we shouldn't be doing this. With pornography and other forms of adult sexual content, it's a little bit like that, but the money is just massive. And when it comes to sexuality, it's always been a bit hush hush, right? Especially in more conservative societies and such. And a lot of these things have been accepted. Well, this is this is a learning platform. How is it a learning platform when we're learning that it is okay to abuse women and girls? How is it a learning platform when pornographers, okay, traffickers, and others, from the criminal world are deciding what happens in our bedrooms?
Yeah.
For example, I took a walk with a survivor of trafficking on the streets in New York, and she said, Tatiana, you have to see what is happening because of the sexuality that is being peddled by these people to in general. I saw older women on the streets being sexually exploited because there's a demand for it now because of what they call granny porn. So all the different strains of various abuse and exploitation is being normalized, creating demand, and then it just kind of goes on and on.
So by us not talking about this enough, we're really playing into the dark side's hand. So it is really also on us to destigmatize that kind of development.
Absolutely, because we have to realize the larger impact of this on society. So we're talking about individuals here, right? How a particular marriage may not work, how a particular man, child, etc., could be addicted to pornography and have long-term impacts on their life because of this: mental health, physical health, cognitive ability, etc. That's the one side of the coin. At the other side of the coin, we're talking about breakup of families and social fabric because of this.
Yeah.
We're talking about massive profits that are not just going into legal businesses, quote unquote, but are going to criminal enterprises and those that are actually trafficking and exploiting women, children, and men to produce these types of materials. You're talking about mental health crisis that is happening all across. There are also a lot of conversations right now about low childbirth. But this is also very much interlinked with this if you're actually looking at the macro piece of this.
How is low childbirth interlinked to this?
Well, if people are not able to build healthy relationships with each other, if there is a lack of the ability to have sexuality that is healthy, that is respectful of the other person, you will not be able to form families or partnerships that actually result in having children and raising those children, and onwards.
I actually read about a study recently that came out not long ago where they were looking at lowering birth rates. And in the beginning, you see the tendencies, especially in the westernized world, where people have made conscious decisions of not having children, which was the biggest tendency. But now it is what you just said. It is because people are not having relationships anymore. And I thought that was really, really shocking. So something is going definitely in a very wrong direction.
Well, if young boys then turn into young men are sitting and watching pornography, are having expectations of having whatever it is they're watching and whatever they were raised to believe as their normal, which it is not, they're going to have a very difficult time actually achieving this situation with whoever they want to be with.
Mm. I guess the rise of AI and the sort of adult content field, does that, does that worry you, or does that come with anything that is positive?
It is horribly worrying
Mm.
because if he had to worry before that someone would enter a household even through a child's phone, now any image that they could take of our child, of you or me, can be turned into this adult content. Meaning they could take a picture of us talking right now
Mhm.
and create a video, AI generated video with horrendous sexual abuse and violence. And there's very little that can be done about it. Taylor Swift has had that experience, but I want to take it to something else. Actually, in South Korea, they've had an epidemic where boys would take pictures of their schoolmate girls and create this AI generated content, which has resulted in destruction, a lot of mental anguish, and even suicides of young women.
Mm. That's
Because
horrendous.
for most people, you cannot tell what is generated, AI generated, what is real, etc. This is also a way to target, women in leadership positions, but also men. I mean, this is a danger to everyone. And this is where really there need to be legal protections and safeguards, where someone cannot take your image and do whatever they please with it, especially produce something like this.
Mm. Which countries do you see on the forefront of fighting against what's happening there and really protecting people more than others? Are there any which are like role models?
Well, as I've mentioned before, Australia, in terms of social media,
Yeah.
for example, they've really taken the first step as a trailblazer in protecting children on social media. There are a number of countries that are moving this way. So, have I seen a country that has been able to solve this issue completely? Not.
Mm.
But there are policies and laws that are coming to place because there is a recognition that something needs to change.
If we really worked on this and as a society and each individual responsibly at home talking about the healthy development of sexuality and the impacts of watching porn, what it really means for content wise and what it does to you, and then also demanding from governments and those who are in responsibility that they take actions, because definitely that's what we've been lacking in the past.
We are in a situation where this is not just desperation, but we're in a situation where there is hope
Hmm.
because right now everyone is talking about AI
Hmm.
and the impact of AI. We are in a position to actually create a difference now
Hmm.
before it goes even to the next level.
Hmm.
So this is where if we create awareness
Hmm.
that this is an issue, because a lot of parents are not even aware that this is an issue.
Yes.
Or even if they are, they think it's what we have seen 25 years ago on VHS tapes or magazines. They're not aware of what is actually going on. So if they're made aware, I truly believe as a society, we will take action. We will protect our children.
Yes.
We will protect our families.
Yeah.
We will protect women and girls, because this is generally abuse of women and girls, because we do not want to have societies which are so terribly damaged that they no longer work.
Yeah. So a question, Tatiana, that I'm asking every single guest: is there a ritual? Is there something you do every day to help manage your day in a better way?
It's an interesting question because every day seems so different from the next for me, especially with all the travel I do. But I think one of the grounding things is actually family for me.
Hmm.
And just taking a moment to see how the day of my loved ones is going and having that conversation. How are you?
Hmm.
And sometimes when I have one of my kids say, "How are you really, mom?"
Hmm.
It warms me in a particular way, and it brings me back to what actually also matters to me personally, outside of the work and everything else that I'm doing.
Yeah, that would have been my next question, because you're dealing with absolutely horrendous things that must leave traces in your life and soul and heart. How do you find joy and a positive outlook on life nonetheless, which you clearly are?
By continuing to do this work because it gives me hope.
Mm-hmm.
It gives me hope that we can change things and that I could be a part of that change, because we could just throw up our hands and say, wow, this is bad. And generally, my work is a bad dinner conversation. Most people do not find it very hopeful, but to me, it is. Actually, the fact that I could do this every day, the fact that I can change things just a little bit, the fact that I could meet people like you with whom I could change it just a little bit more is hopeful.
Yeah, I get that. It was also the same for me when I was working in that field, protecting children from sexual abuse. People always asked me that question. I said, knowing about it and not trying to change it wouldn't have been an option for me. And any little change you see, any person you'd helped, any smile on someone's face where actually things are going forward, that would actually bring me forward too and make me much happier.
I'll give you an example. So, in my previous role at the OSCE, I launched the International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Council, which was composed of survivor leaders all across the world, women and men who have experienced a variety of different forms of trafficking and exploitation, and who have found their light and are using their life to have an impact on these issues, from legal point of view, policy point of view, frontline point of view, and such, and who are using their lived experience and expertise to change this whole situation, to change the dynamic, because they know it from every which side.
Yeah, let's change it together and keep up the fight. Thank you so much, Tatiana, once again.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, as well.
Wow, there was so much to digest from that episode. Tatiana is so knowledgeable and such a fighter for the rights of women and girls. There's so much to learn about the harm of online porn and how to protect ourselves and our families from it. Thank you again to Tatiana for sharing her expertise with us, and not to mention to continue to fight. We have many more experts on how to navigate our lives online coming up on the show, so do click follow to get more episodes straight into your podcast feed each week. This episode of How Do We Manage was brought to you by Audi, hosted by me, Stephanie von Bismarck, and featured Tatiana Kotlyarenko. It was produced by Tory, the production manager was Crago, and the executive producer was Ellie Martino. The series was recorded and edited at Podshop Studios in London.